Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am doing week 52 of my 2020 reads, wrapping up the end of the year. So I read a ton of really great reads at the end of the year, so there's quite a few things on here. I did wait until the year actually ended, so this is more like a week and a half's worth of reading, but it was such a great week and a half. Also, at the end of this video, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the holiday things that my husband Sush and I did, including making a gingerbread house from scratch. So first I finished Ring Shout by P. Djèlí Clark, which I loved. This was such a great novella, and I actually have a review of that will come out in a few days. I truly loved this, and I loved also that I heard such positive things about it ahead of time. Ashley at Don't Have a Degree in Reading, who I will link below, did a great review of it early on, and that convinced me that I needed to pre-order a physical copy. I love P. Djèlí Clark's works, but I was a little bit unsure since this is a sort of a dark fantasy verging on horror, but I am so glad that I bought my own copy because I would have wanted to buy one anyway. It is such a great novel. So this is basically a historical dark fantasy or horror set in the 1920s in Georgia, following a group of Black women who have some magical sight. They can see these monsters from another dimension called Ku Kluxes, who inhabit members of the KKK, and they fight against them. So this is very much an epic battle against evil type of thing, except that it has a lot of complexity in the way that it discusses racism and hatred. It is filled with excellent writing, a lot of action, a lot of really interesting discussions about politics and about racism and about the way that we handle all of it. I just loved everything about this novella. It's so good. Definitely check out my review later this week if you're interested in more, but I highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read 2 more books in the Earthsea cycle, The Farthest Shore and Tehanu by Ursula K. Le Guin. The Farthest Shore is book 3 and part of the original trilogy that was published in the 60s, 70s, and Tehanu is book 4 and was published much later in the 90s. The Farthest Shore is very much part of that original series. It is sort of a questing journey, fight against evil type of story. It follows a boy and an older man who have to figure out kind of what is sort of stopping and poisoning and decaying the magic in their world. And they go on a big journey for that. I think that this one had some beautiful writing. It had really interesting travels. I do like journey stories a lot, but it does verge into slightly more literary type of feel where there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of more vague language, not necessarily concrete things that happen. And I also sort of didn't always connect with just this boy and older man story, especially because there's a bit of that chosen one type of trope where the boy is somebody who's going to become a great leader and fix everything, which is a very simplistic type of story, but again, this was written in the 70s. So this one I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Tehanu, on the other hand, is a very different type of book. Tehanu is something that is really different. It shows so much of a maturation of Le Guin's writing, I think, and the way that she handles this world and the themes that she decides to address. So in Tehanu, we follow mainly a widow, so a middle-aged woman who is trying to figure out what her life means and what her purpose in life is. And she adopts a girl that is found who has been abused terribly. She is a young girl who has been raped, and then the people who did that attempted to murder her by throwing her into a fire. So lots of content warning for this one, and she's very scarred from that and traumatized. And so a lot of this book is about their journey and about them trying to figure out their place in the world and trying to deal with the way that people treat them and understanding sort of the nature of power and the nature of how women and children and those who are disabled are treated. And it's just a very, very interesting discussion. I was thoroughly engaged in this one. I really, really loved it. It had all of the great world building, but really that depth of theme that I want in my stories. So this I gave 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished If the Boot Fits by Rebekah Weatherspoon, which is the sequel to A Cowboy to Remember. I loved this book so much, and it brought me so much joy, especially because I read it on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and it was just so perfect. I really, truly loved this book. It is a contemporary romance, which is sort of a loose Cinderella retelling. We follow a man who is an actor and has just won an Oscar, and he ends up at the after party hooking up for a one-night stand with a very mysterious woman. And she actually is just an assistant to a kind of minor TV star who lives sort of the Cinderella life. They end up sort of not knowing each other and separating, but eventually reconnecting. And it is such a sweet story. I really, really loved the characters. I loved the banter. I loved the attraction between them. I love in Rebekah Weatherspoon's work the way that there is so much about consent and about sort of following your dreams and about listening to what other people want and what they need. There's so much about respect. I really, really loved the way that this book was handled. If you're interested in this, I do recommend checking out Kazen at Always Doing. She has a review of the first book in the series, A Cowboy to Remember. So I'm going to link that below. If you're interested, start with that book. It is definitely a great series. I'm super excited for the third book in the series, and I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It made my heart happy. Next, I finished Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is sort of an urban fantasy / gangster book. So the premise is basically that in the 1970s, it was discovered or came to light that there are vampires all over the world. And a lot of countries kicked the vampires out of their borders, and many of them went to Mexico, which was a little bit more loose in terms of who it allowed in. A lot of these vampires are from different parts of the world and have very different kind of physiology and traits. But there are also some vampires that are native to Mexico and kind of from a heritage that goes back to Aztec times. So we follow a couple of characters in Mexico City, and Mexico City is sort of a no vampire zone because many of the vampires are basically part of clans that have drug cartels, and the human drug cartels in Mexico City don't want them on their turf, and so they've made this kind of no vampire city, except that we have a couple of vampires who come, escaping some violence between their clans to Mexico City to then fight it out there. And so we follow them as well as some of the human detectives and other people who are trying to get them out. So this story is really, really gripping, very consumable, but also so violent. This is very much like a mafia movie, and it has a very fast pace, and it has a lot of things that happen, and a lot of violence. I really like Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing. I loved the mythology that is in this, the way that she developed each of the types of vampires, and they each have different traits and different ways of being, different ways of feeding. It was fascinating. I liked the characters a lot, but that violence was really intense in this, especially from about the 2/3 point to the end. It was a lot of action with a lot of violence, and it reminds me of what I imagine gangster films are, kind of like this mafia thing, which I don't watch because that's not my thing. So I actually almost DNF'd this book because of the violence, but I was so into the story that I kept going, and I'm glad that I did because I really did enjoy the story. It just was very violent. Also, this book doesn't necessarily have the same depth of themes that I've noticed in a lot of other works by Silvia Moreno Garcia, so I didn't get that out of it, but I just really enjoyed the mythology, and I really enjoyed the characters, and the story was pretty gripping. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan, which is book number 7 in the Wheel of Time series. So this is a series that Sush and I have been reading out loud to each other for the past I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and we're in book 7. This one took us a year to read, so we're going very slowly. We're kind of fitting it in around the other things that we've been reading, but we finished it in 2020, and that made us both really pleased. So this one, obviously, it's in the middle of the series, so can't tell you too much plot, but really, there isn't much plot anyway. Even if you know what's going on, not much plot occurs in book 7. It's more just little snippets, almost slices of life for many of the different characters. And there is some progression in a lot of the separate storylines. There's a couple of pieces in particular that were really exciting to read about, but mainly this is a book that you will like if you like that kind of depth of world building and just kind of delving into each little nook and cranny of the story. So I thoroughly enjoyed that, and it would have been really high rated, except that there was some content in this that I felt was definitely outdated and for me problematic. So in particular, there's one male character who is raped kind of at knife point by another female character, and it was not really given the seriousness that I think it deserved. I think just because of that gender swapping, it was treated as not as much of a serious thing. There's definitely some shades where maybe Robert Jordan was trying to talk about the way that society sees that, in that we see that male character struggling and, you know, kind of feeling some trauma afterwards, but it's just not addressed in the way that I'd like. Also, there is some abuse between characters. There is a woman who hits her lover, and it's just not treated as seriously as it should be because it was the woman hitting the man. And I wish it had been given a little bit better treatment, I think. So those were kind of problematic aspects for me, but I still enjoyed so much of the story. I really liked the way that it delved into all of these different characters and moved forward. But if you like plot, this is probably not going to be the book for you. Even so, I still enjoyed it quite a bit, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, on New Year's Eve, I finished Sal and Gabi Fix the Universe by Carlos Hernandez, which is the sequel to Sal and Gabi Break the Universe. I knew that I was gonna love this, and I loved it so much. And I finished this at 11:15 p.m. on New Year's Eve, so truly such a highlight to end the year with. This book is fantastic. Absolutely loved it, and really all of the things that it does are very much the things that I loved about the first book as well. I have a standalone review for the first book in this series, so if you're interested, check out that review because I think that you definitely want to start with the first book. The second book really sort of wraps things up and develops them more, and it has so many interesting discussions in it. It has a lot about just the way that characters grow, the way that they acknowledge when they've made mistakes, the way that they try to become more mature people, the way that they find ways to come together with each other to fix things rather than seeing each other as enemies. I loved all of the messages. The humor is so silly, but oh, it makes me laugh so much. I laughed so much throughout this whole book. I loved the characters. I loved all of the sort of science that goes into this. I loved it's so much fun. This book brings me so much joy. I strongly recommend this series. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely recommend you pick it up. In addition to the books that I finished this week, I did also DNF one book, which was Heartbeat Braves by Pamela Sanderson. This is a book that was the group read for the Indigathon, and I actually was very much a fan of what this book was doing. It's just that it didn't quite work for me. So this is a contemporary romance that follows a couple of early 20s characters who are working in a community center for a tribe in an urban area. And I think that the thing that I found was that it wasn't that I disliked this book at all, but I just never really got into it. So I actually started this in November, and I finally, at the end of this year, just realized I am not picking this up enough. I got to about 25% in an entire month, which just isn't really very much, especially considering how quickly romances generally read. But I found that I was just picking it up a little bit, reading some, and just not being interested in continuing. So the basic premise is that there is a young woman who is working at this community center, organizing a lot of stuff, but things are not going so great for the community center. And so one of the people on the board for the community center decides that his nephew is going to work with them and help out. So a little bit of nepotism there. But the nephew is someone who doesn't really know where he's going in life, doesn't really know what he's doing. And the reason why his uncle has volunteered him for this position is because his nephew's mom asked the uncle to get him a job. So he's kind of thrust into this and trying to help, but he doesn't really know what he's doing. So what I found was that dynamic was not so much for me. This is sort of an enemies to lovers style of romance, and that's, again, not so much my trope. I kind of like it if the characters just like each other from the beginning. But the young woman who is working in this community center is like super directed. She knows what she's doing. She's on top of it. And this guy is just kind of lost in life. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just sort of barely scraping by, trying to figure out what he wants. And that dynamic just didn't work for me. I couldn't really get into the romance. So definitely, I thought that the writing was good. I thought that there were a lot of interesting discussions about issues that affect Native communities. There were a lot of really good things about this story, but I just wasn't into it. And so I finally decided to DNF it. Okay, so those are all of the books that I have read or DNF'd in the last week of December. If you guys have read any of these, if you have any thoughts, any comments, anything like that, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I just wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about the holidays and some of the stuff that Sush and I did, just to share with you because it was a lot of fun. So first, really quick, I wanted to share one of the gifts that Sush got me that made me so happy, which is a book. So Sush got me a copy of Babel 17 that was published in the 70s. I had read Babel 17 about a year and a half ago and loved it and wanted to get a physical copy, except that I really strongly disliked all of the covers. The cover for the ebook is awesome, but the cover for all of the physical books I just really didn't like. So he surprised me by going and finding an older version that has a cover that I think is much better than anything else that's in print. So that made me super happy, and this is one of my favorite gifts that he got me. So I wanted to share that. And then the other thing that I wanted to share was our gingerbread house. So this year, since we didn't go anywhere for Christmas, we didn't see family, we kind of tried to find ways to make it special to celebrate at home. And one of the things that we decided to do was to bake a gingerbread house completely from scratch. Usually we just get like a kit, or in recent years we've had a mold, and so we can bake actual gingerbread ourselves, but put it in the mold and then you just kind of glue it together and decorate it. But this year we decided to do it totally from scratch, I think very much inspired by Great British Baking Show. And it was a ton of fun. We took about a week to put it all together. There were a lot of different components, but basically we used some stencils we made cut out of paper in the shapes that we wanted. Cut that out, baked the gingerbread. We had some windows that we filled with melted sugar, as well as like a lake that we made out of melted sugar. We made some kind of hills and shrubbery out of Rice Krispie treats that we covered in royal icing. We did some of the ground in shredded coconut and a path in crushed up candy canes. We decorated the house with some shingles made out of coconut coconut marzipan that we made, as well as like added on little candies to look like lights. We had also a light inside of the house, like a little dollhouse chandelier light that almost went out by the time we finished making this because we took so long. And then we just like dusted it with powdered sugar, and it was so much fun. We had such a great time putting this together, figuring out what pieces we were gonna make, how we were gonna design everything, and it was just such a fun time. So we were really, really happy with how that turned out. We've loved looking at it since we finished it, and really even while it was in progress, it was just a ton of fun. So I hope that you guys had wonderful holidays. I hope that it was restful. I hope that it was fun. Definitely if you did anything special or anything fun, go ahead, let me know what it was down below. And I should in the next week have up some of my end of the year things, so my stats and goals and my best of list. So look forward to that if you want to see those, and definitely leave me a comment about anything you want to chat about down below.